History is not only written in laws and wars, but in moments when entire societies gathered to witness something extraordinary, terrifying, or fatally unforgettable. From the aquatic bloodbaths of ancient Rome to industrial-age locomotive collisions in the American West, these public spectacles reveal how power, prestige, and control were performed in front of the masses. These events expose the hidden mechanics of civilization itself, the theater of cruelty, the economy of prestige, and the human hunger to witness the impossible. Each story ahead is grounded in real chronicles and evidence, reconstructing worlds where wonder and horror shared the same stage. Stay with me, because these 10 jaw-dropping spectacles prove that throughout history, humanity has repeatedly chosen amazement, even when the cost was human life. At number 1, we step into the Roman naumachia, an aquatic spectacle that represented the absolute peak of Roman engineering, brutality, and imperial propaganda, staged as simulated naval battles, designed not for sport, but for mass execution. Unlike traditional gladiatorial contests where trained fighters could sometimes survive, the naumachia forced prisoners of war and condemned criminals onto massive biremes and triremes, where real maritime combat ensured death through drowning, burning, or violent boarding actions. The first recorded naumachia took place in 46 before Christ under Julius Caesar, who ordered a massive basin excavated near the Tiber River, capable of holding 2,000 combatants and 4,000 rowers, establishing water as a new medium for imperial slaughter. This precedent reached its most extreme form in 52 after Christ, when Emperor Claudius staged a colossal naumachia on Lake Fucino to celebrate the completion of a massive drainage tunnel, involving 19,000 condemned men and 100 ships, reenacting the historical conflict between Rhodes and Sicily. The scale was so vast that Praetorian guards armed with catapults and ballistae encircled the lake to prevent escape, and it was during this event that the chilling phrase, "Those who are about to die salute you," was first recorded. Later, during the Flavian era, even the Colosseum itself was reportedly flooded, with historians like Cassius Dio describing a disastrous sea battle in 86 after Christ that ended when a violent storm caused widespread drowning among both combatants and trapped spectators. These spectacles were not merely entertainment, but demonstrations of absolute imperial dominance, where Rome proved that even the sea could be conquered, weaponized, and turned into a blood-soaked stage for historical reenactment and public terror, making the naumachia one of the most unbelievable public spectacles in human history. Coming in at number 2 is the Cadaver Synod of 897 after Christ, a macabre public event that transformed the medieval papacy into a theater of political vengeance and spiritual horror. At the center of this grotesque trial was the corpse of Pope Formosus, who had ruled from 891 to 896, and whose political decisions during the decline of Carolingian power earned him powerful enemies, particularly the Spoletan faction. When Pope Stephen VI ascended to the papal throne under Spoleto influence, he ordered Formosus's body exhumed 9 months after burial, dressed in full papal vestments, and seated on a throne inside the Lateran Basilica to face formal charges. The trial followed strict ecclesiastical procedure, with a young deacon assigned to speak on behalf of the decaying corpse, while Stephen VI screamed accusations of perjury, illegal transfer of bishops, and violating canon law. Unsurprisingly, the dead pope was found guilty, and his punishment included the ritual mutilation of the 3 fingers used for blessings, stripping of papal robes, and public disposal of the body into the Tiber River. The sheer absurdity and horror of putting a dead man on trial shocked Rome, triggering public outrage that ultimately led to Stephen VI being deposed and strangled in prison. Formosus's remains were later recovered and reburied in St. Peter's Basilica, but the Cadaver Synod remains one of history's most disturbing public spectacles, proving that the hunger for power can reach beyond death itself. Landing at number 3 is the Erfurt latrine disaster of 1184, a public event where medieval diplomacy collapsed into one of the most humiliating mass deaths ever recorded. The tragedy unfolded during a formal imperial court assembly convened by King Henry VI, later Holy Roman Emperor, to resolve a land dispute between Archbishop Conrad of Mainz and Landgrave Ludwig III of Thuringia. Nearly 100 armored nobles gathered on the second floor of an aging structure inside the Petersburg Citadel, a building never designed to support such immense weight. On July 26th, as political arguments intensified, the wooden floor suddenly collapsed, sending the assembled elite crashing through the lower level and directly into the building's massive open cesspit. While some victims died instantly from the fall or falling debris, the majority drowned in liquid waste or suffocated from toxic fumes rising from centuries of accumulated sewage, with historical accounts estimating between 60 and 100 noble deaths. King Henry VI and Archbishop Conrad survived only by clinging to stone window railings until rescue ladders arrived, while Landgrave Ludwig III was pulled alive from the filth below. The Erfurt latrine disaster wiped out a generation of German nobility and stands as one of the most unbelievable historical spectacles, where power, privilege, and pride were literally swallowed by human waste, exposing the fragile reality of medieval life in the most grotesque way imaginable. Stepping in at number 4 is the execution of György Dózsa in 1514, a public spectacle so deliberately cruel that it was engineered to scar the collective memory of Hungary forever. György Dózsa, a Szekely nobleman and experienced soldier from the wars against the Ottomans, was originally appointed to lead a crusade, but the peasant army under his command quickly transformed into a full-scale social rebellion against the Hungarian landed nobility. When the uprising was finally crushed at Temesvar by the forces of John Zápolya, the ruling elite rejected the idea of a simple execution, deciding instead to stage a ritualized punishment designed to annihilate any future dream of peasant resistance. What followed was a grotesque mock coronation, a symbolic inversion of royal ceremony meant to punish Dózsa for being hailed as the so-called peasant king. He was stripped naked and seated upon an iron throne heated until it glowed white, while a red-hot iron crown was pressed onto his head and a burning iron scepter was forced into his hand. To heighten the theatrical cruelty, musicians played pipes and violins as monks danced and sang a Te Deum, turning sacred ritual into a carnival of torment. The horror escalated further when Dózsa's closest followers, starved for 10 days, were forced to dance around him and, under threat of death, compelled to bite into his roasted flesh. After prolonged agony, Dózsa was decapitated and quartered, with his remains sent to Hungarian cities as a public warning. This execution was not merely a death sentence, but a calculated performance of terror, making it one of the most unbelievable historical spectacles ever staged by a state to enforce social order through fear. Rolling in at number 5 is the Dancing Plague of 1518, a mass public spectacle in Strasbourg that turned human bodies into unwilling performers in a deadly choreography. The event began quietly in July when a woman named Frau Trophea stepped into the street and began dancing uncontrollably, without music and without joy, her movements driven by visible distress rather than celebration. Despite bleeding feet, exhaustion, and her husband's pleas, she danced for 6 straight days, collapsing only to resume the moment she regained consciousness. Within 1 week, dozens joined her, and within a month, nearly 400 people were consumed by the same irresistible compulsion, transforming Strasbourg streets into a nightmarish stage of endless motion. City authorities consulted physicians who diagnosed the cause as overheated blood, a common medical belief of the time, and disastrously concluded that the only cure was more dancing. Wooden stages were erected, musicians were hired, and strong men were employed to keep the afflicted moving, turning the outbreak into an officially sanctioned spectacle. At its peak, up to 15 people were reportedly dying each day from heart attacks, strokes, and sheer physical collapse. Modern explanations range from ergot poisoning in rye bread to stress-induced mass psychogenic illness fueled by famine, disease, and belief in the curse of Saint Vitus. The dancing plague finally ended when the dancers were taken on pilgrimage to a mountain shrine and given red shoes sprinkled with holy water. The Dancing Plague remains one of history's strangest public events, where fear, belief, and biology fused into a fatal performance no one could escape. Claiming number 6 is the Field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520, an 18-day diplomatic summit that became the most extravagant display of royal excess ever witnessed in Europe. Held near Calais, the meeting between King Henry VIII of England and King Francis I of France was officially intended to secure universal peace, but in reality, it unfolded as a lavish competition of prestige and dominance. The valley was transformed into a golden city, filled with silk tents woven with real gold thread and temporary palaces designed to outshine permanent royal courts. The English delegation alone arrived with more than 5,000 attendants and thousands of horses, constructing a massive timber palace painted to resemble stone and fitted with vast panes of real glass. Outside stood a gilded fountain flowing freely with red, white, and claret wine, while records detail the consumption of hundreds of thousands of gallons of alcohol, thousands of sheep, nearly 100,000 eggs, and enormous quantities of fish. Despite the outward display of brotherhood, the rivalry between the two young athletic kings simmered beneath the surface. Although rules forbade them from jousting each other, the tension erupted when Henry VIII initiated a wrestling match, only to be swiftly thrown to the ground by Francis I in front of both courts. The summit ended with fireworks shaped like a flying dragon, but the peace it promised dissolved within a year as England and France returned to war. The Field of the Cloth of Gold stands as one of the most unbelievable historical spectacles, proving that even diplomacy can become a battlefield when pride wears a crown of gold. Sliding in at number 7 is the Bal des Ardents of 1393, a royal celebration in Paris that transformed aristocratic excess into a living nightmare of fire and madness. Held at the Hôtel Saint-Paul to celebrate the third marriage of one of Queen Isabeau's ladies-in-waiting, the event followed the tradition of a chevalerie, a raucous and mocking form of entertainment filled with ribald humor. At its center was King Charles VI, a monarch already showing signs of severe mental illness after a recent psychotic episode in which he had killed 4 of his own knights in a forest. The king and 5 noblemen performed a dance disguised as mythical wildwood savages, sewn into linen costumes soaked in pitch, resin, and flax to create a shaggy appearance that was dangerously flammable. Strict orders were given to keep all torches fixed to the walls, far from the performers. The disaster struck when Louis, Duke of Orleans, the king's brother, arrived late and intoxicated, carrying a lit torch to identify the masked dancers. A single spark ignited the resin-soaked costumes, and within seconds, 4 noblemen were engulfed in flames, their suits melting into their skin as they screamed across the ballroom floor. King Charles survived only because the 15-year-old Duchess of Berry smothered the flames with her heavy skirts, while one other dancer escaped by leaping into a vat of wine. The tragedy devastated the French court and accelerated Charles's descent into permanent insanity, including his later belief that his body was made of glass. The Bal des Ardents remains one of history's most shocking public spectacles, where royal decadence, mental illness, and catastrophic negligence combined into a firestorm that literally burned the dignity of the French monarchy. Taking number 8 is the Crash at Crush of 1896, an industrial-age spectacle that turned corporate promotion into sudden mass violence. Orchestrated by the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad in McLennan County, Texas, the stunt was conceived by passenger agent William George Crush as a way to sell excursion tickets through a planned head-on collision between 2 steam locomotives. For a $2 round-trip ticket, nearly 40,000 spectators gathered in a natural valley, temporarily making Crush the second-largest city in Texas. A full pop-up town was constructed with a massive platform, food stands, medicine shows, and a bandstand, while the locomotives number 1001 and number 999 were toured across the state for months to build anticipation. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the engines were released from opposite ends of a 4-mile track, accelerating toward each other as the engineers jumped clear after 4 wheel rotations. The collision occurred at a combined speed exceeding 100 miles per hour, producing the promised explosion of twisted metal. However, a fatal miscalculation caused both boilers to detonate simultaneously, launching white-hot shrapnel deep into the crowd. 2 spectators were killed instantly, including a man struck while sitting in a tree, and many others were badly injured, including a photographer who lost an eye. Despite the bloodshed, souvenir hunters rushed the wreckage before it cooled, and the publicity stunt was deemed a success, with Crush rehired after a brief dismissal. Coming in at number 9 is the Hodinka tragedy of 1896, a coronation celebration that collapsed into one of the deadliest crowd disasters in history. Intended to honor the coronation of Tsar Nicholas II, the event centered on the distribution of 400,000 gift packages at Hodinka Field in Moscow, each containing an enameled commemorative cup, bread, sausage, pretzels, sweets, and beer. The field, however, was a former military training ground riddled with trenches and pits that had been hastily covered with wooden planks. On the morning of May 18th, more than 500,000 people gathered, many having camped overnight, vastly exceeding expectations. Rumors spread rapidly that the gifts were running out and that the cups contained gold coins, triggering a sudden surge toward the distribution stalls. As the crowd pressed forward, the wooden coverings collapsed, sending people tumbling into trenches where they were crushed or suffocated by the sheer force of the masses behind them. By the end of the chaos, 1,389 people were dead, with thousands more injured. In a decision that shocked the nation, Nicholas II attended a lavish ball at the French embassy that same evening, prioritizing diplomatic appearances over public mourning. This perceived indifference earned him the name Bloody Nicholas and permanently damaged the bond between the monarchy and the people. Closing the list at number 10 is the 1904 Olympic Marathon, a sporting event that devolved into a reckless human experiment disguised as athletic competition. Held in St. Louis during extreme 92-degree heat, the race took place on dusty, hilly roads with little shade and almost no water. Chief organizer James Sullivan deliberately restricted hydration to test the theory of purposeful dehydration, providing only a single water stop at the 12-mile mark. The conditions were so brutal that 18 of the 32 runners failed to finish, while William Garcia nearly died from internal bleeding after inhaling thick dust kicked up by official vehicles. The chaos continued at the finish line when Fred Lortz crossed first after having dropped out at mile 9 and riding 11 miles in a car, claiming it was a joke before being disqualified. Victory was awarded to Thomas Hicks, whose trainers kept him moving by feeding him egg whites, brandy, and strychnine sulfate, a rat poison that caused hallucinations and physical collapse. Hicks was practically carried across the finish line and required immediate medical intervention to survive. Other competitors included Felix Carvajal, a Cuban postman who ate rotten apples, took a nap, and still finished fourth, and Len Tonyanon, who was chased a mile off course by wild dogs. The 1904 marathon stands as one of the most unbelievable public spectacles in Olympic history, where ambition, ignorance, and danger turned the ideal of sport into a near-fatal ordeal. As these 10 unbelievable spectacles reveal, human societies have always been drawn to the extraordinary, often valuing awe and power over safety and ethics. From collapsing floors and burning costumes to exploding machines and deadly experiments, these events show what happens when ambition pushes beyond moral and technical limits. Each tragedy remains etched in history because it reflects the values, fears, and obsessions of its time, turning public celebration into lasting warning. These spectacles are not side notes of the past, they are mirrors of the human condition, showing how thin the line is between glory and catastrophe. If these stories made you think, disturbed you, or left you in disbelief, share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep, powerful history content.